Hey everyone, welcome to a new YouTube video, and as you can see by, the screen, we are currently talking about the disputes of Asia. I found a lot of disputes that exist in Asia, and some of these may not be technically considered disputes, but moving on, let's get to the first one. We have the People's Republic of China versus Republic of China, and I know that it would be preferable if I had this in the center, but with the way I'm doing it, it's going to be stuck on the left or right side, depending on how you look at it. But anyways, the territory disputed between the two is Taiwan. Why? Well, we have to go back to the 20s to begin, which is actually the 1920s is quite long ago. But during the 1920s, the Chinese nationalists and the Chinese communists broke their alliance, and a civil war began. But in the 1930s, Japan invaded China, and this would continue into the 40s. And due to Japan invading China during World War II, the Civil War was put on pause to deal with Japan. But after Japan was defeated in 1946, the Civil War resumed. Actually, Japan was defeated in 1945. I'm saying 1946 is the year that it was resumed. Continuing anyways. The communists won the Civil War, and the nationalists had to flee to the island of Taiwan, which is now a disputed territory, as the People's Republic of China says that they own it, but the remnants of the Republic of China claim it to be theirs. Moving on, we have India versus Pakistan, with the dispute over Kashmir. Now, the Kashmir dispute goes back to the independence of India from Great Britain. As you can tell, I don't have a script. I'm just doing this as I go. But anyways, after India was granted independence from Britain, they split the British Raj into India and Pakistan. India was meant for the Hindus and Pakistan for the Muslims. But this created a big divide between the two, which would lead to them leading to the brink of war, which both inventing nuclear arsenals and getting closer and closer to war. But they also had disputes over Kashmir. When India claimed the territory to be theirs, Pakistan basically said no, and declared some of it theirs. Speaking of Kashmir, India also has to deal with China in terms of Kashmir, as it's a very similar story. When India claimed Kashmir, China said no, and declared some of it to be theirs. Now, moving out of territories that you generally talk about when you think Asia, like China, India, Pakistan, Russia, etc., let's move to the Middle East, with Israel versus Palestine. And yes, I know I spelled Palestine incorrectly, but let's forget about that. Now, this is very, very controversial, and I'll try and keep it just factual here, but it's going to be hard. So, when Britain gave independence to Israel during the Cold War, all the Arabs in Israel were like, nope, and asked the other Arabs for help. The Arabs did help them, and the Arabs went to war with Israel. This led to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with the state of Israel and the state of Palestine both being there. The war eventually technically ended with technically an Israeli victory, though that's once again a controversial idea. But they captured the Jerusalem from the Arabs, and that's kind of where the beginning of the war ended. when the Arabs first declared war on Israel. But that's a different story. The point is, Palestine is realistically independent, but technically still a part of Israel. I'm trying to put this in a sense where it's not controversial, which is hard. But sticking with the topic of Israel, we're moving to Israel and Egypt. For the Sinai Peninsula, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. But basically, continuing with the whole problem between Israel and the Arabs, Egypt is an Arab state. So, naturally, they fought a war with Israel, like all the other Arab states had. But this led to a dispute, first of all, we're going to talk about the Gaza Strip, though it has nothing to do with of the Sinai Peninsula. But technically, the Gaza Strip was annexed into Egypt, but then was given to Palestine with the whole everything else going on. But Israel and Egypt fought a war where Israeli troops occupied most of the Sinai Peninsula and technically annexed it. So after the war ended, it was given back to Egypt, but Israel still technically recognizes it as theirs. Now moving on to one final thing, we're leaving the Middle East and we're moving on to Hong Kong. So China and Hong Kong is another weird one. It's technically not a dispute, but it's still worth mentioning, as the city of Hong Kong has a very high level of autonomy due to an agreement made by China and the United Kingdom when the UK gave it back to China. And it's weird, which might deserve a video of its own, but the end. I hope you enjoyed. Now let me know if you want me to do a part 2 to disputes in Asia, or if you want me to do something else like disputes in, I don't know, Europe. But goodbye.